It is my great pleasure to introduce Father Nathan Castle, who will be our next speaker. Father Nathan Castle, OP, is from Groves, Texas. Father Nathan received an MA and Master's of Divinity degree from the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. He served in campus ministries at Arizona State University, Stanford University, and the University of California at Riverside. Father Nathan has chaired the executive board of the Catholic Campus Ministries Association. He believes that the Holy Spirit has given him a night job of helping souls who died suddenly and violently find afterlife peace. He is the author of Afterlife Interrupted, books 1 and 2, Helping Stuck Souls Cross Over. Please welcome Father Nathan Castle.
Hello, everybody. You're watching an old dog learn new tricks right in front of you. The most complicated part of this for me is simply the screen share. So there's the hello to everybody, and thank you, Yvonne, for the presentation you just made, and for the little introduction you've just done, and for inviting me to be a part of this. It already looks like a gathering of friends, even though we're all over the place looking at screens. I've been enjoying the last couple of days, and there's just a sweetness about all that is going on here. So thank you for bringing us together. In the time that I've been given, I want to introduce you to my little world. One of the things I enjoy both about IANDS and Spiritual Awakenings International is the eagerness with which people listen to each other's stories. Even though we also have academic points to make and so on, it's never very far away from here's what happened to me, and here's what's formed me, and here's what's most important to me. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just helping you know who I am so that you decide what you make of me. I'm 66 years old. I'm a Roman Catholic priest. I'm a Dominican, if that means anything to you. St. Dominic was a reformer and a joyful friar, and I've been a member of the Dominican order for 42, almost 43 years, and a Catholic priest for 37 just this week. My anniversary was a few days ago. But I was raised in Southeast Texas in a family that not only brought me up with the do's and don'ts of an organized religion, but helped me learn about the spirit and about the world I was in, gave me a cosmology, an understanding of what this all was, why I was here, and so on. My dad had two siblings, both of whom became Dominican nuns and first grade teachers. And one of them was around quite a lot. My mom was a great teacher of the faith and of spiritual practice. And my dad's mother lived next door and was a mystic. So I feel like from early on, I had lots of very positive input about being loved by God, being in a place where I was on purpose and desired, and having a mission, even as a little child. This business of working with souls that have died already and still have an ongoing life and some sort of need of help was not a foreign idea to me, because I was going to Catholic school, and one of the things that I was taught about was heaven, hell, and purgatory, and especially purgatory. I was very interested. It made sense to me that I wouldn't have used the word binary at the time, but if there was only a good place and a bad place, it would seem like most things aren't like that. Much of life has something that involves something in the middle. And purgatory was explained to me as this, it means purging, to cleanse, but it's a place where most people went when they died so that they could kind of get ready, the way that you might clean up and put on your best clothes or something for your entrance into heaven, that there would be this place where you could prep and be at your very best when you entered into heaven, but that the people there needed help getting ready somehow, and that we could help them with our prayers. So I was really small, maybe 3, 4 years old, and my mom taught me how to bless people. Blessings are common to most of the world's major faith traditions. She before I could even make a sentence on my own, she would do at night with me. She would help me by repeating after her, and we would bless family members. They could be family members that you lived with, your cousins in Louisiana. They could be somebody that died already. It didn't really matter where they were and whether they were on the earth or they weren't. You could send them a blessing. Now, a blessing was something like sending a gift. You didn't necessarily need to know what the other person needed. You could just ask for goodness to go toward them, and somehow they'd receive it. And so I was good at that practice. I mean, I did that really often. But then I learned that I was in first grade, I think, in Catholic school. We were learning that sometimes people in purgatory can move faster through it if they have a lot of people praying for them and sending them blessings. But purgatory was kind of a Catholic category, and other people really didn't know it existed. And I lived in a part of Southeast Texas, right on the Louisiana border on the Gulf Coast, where we were mostly Catholics or Baptist. You were one or the other. And I knew that the Baptists didn't believe in it. So I made it my business as a little kid. We got a newspaper in the morning and one at night, and they both had an obituary page. So you had this page full of pictures of people who had died the day before. And at the bottom, it told you what church they were going to have their funeral at. So I would pick out the ones that weren't Catholic, because I figured that their relatives wouldn't know to pray for them in purgatory. So I was trying to see that they got taken care of. I imagined it to be sort of like this place where you had to wait. That was clear. And one place that you had to wait was when you went to the bank. My dad was determined that all 5 of us kids were going to have we're going to go to college, that we had a little passport savings account. And he took us to the bank on a regular basis to bring the point home that one of these days the resources would be there for us to go to college. But when you went, they planned on you having to wait. There were these little ropes that went back and forth like at an amusement park, and you had to wait your turn. So somehow in my little mind, I thought of the people in purgatory as like the poor souls waiting in line at the bank. And they'd eventually get to the front, but they get there even faster if you help them cut. And you could help them cut by praying for them, by saying a blessing. So I did that very faithfully throughout my childhood. I was determined that purgatory was going to have prompt customer service if I had anything to do with it. And one of my aunts, who was his first grade teacher and Dominican nun, she took me aside when I was 7, right before making First Communion. And she said, I have something very important to tell you. You must listen carefully. God loves everybody, but the prayers of children go straight to God's heart. You won't be a child very long. While you're a child, pray as hard as you can for as many things as you can imagine. And somehow or another, I'm 66 now, and I'm remembering that advice given to a 7-year-old. And I took it to heart. It made sense to me that what I heard of Jesus was that in his world, the last come first, the weak are strong, and little kids are very important. So I made it my business to not waste my short childhood. And I was very determined to pray for all kinds of things, but I would fall asleep at night praying for the souls in line at the bank in purgatory. Well, anyway, fast forward to a long time later than that, I went to college in San Antonio at Trinity University, which is affiliated with the Presbyterian Church. I moved through my years there. I had an experience right upon my graduation. I don't know how a Kundalini awakening. I'm not conversant in in that I listened to other people's stories, but I had something on the order of, at least a Christian might call it, the infilling of the Holy Spirit, that blew me away because I was open to it and seeking it, trying to find my way in the world. When I was 21, I was discerning the possibility of becoming a priest, which terrified me. I used to pray, "Oh God, take me, I'm yours, I'll do anything you want, just don't make me be a priest, amen." And then, of course, eventually I did that. However, um, I became a Dominican. I was very interested in working with young people and working in a university setting, in part because I wanted to be in a place where this world religion, Roman Catholicism, intersected with questions of all kinds and people exploring and trying to know more and better. That acquisition of knowledge was also always very important to me. Well, it happened that I was working at Arizona State University. I was there for 12 years as the director of the campus ministry there. Later, I went on to Stanford for 7 more there as director of the Catholic community. But while at Arizona State, I was simply up in the mountains. Like right now, I'm in San Diego and not in Tucson where I live because it's so blasted hot. And I had the opportunity to come toward the coast where it's cooler. But in Arizona, a lot of people will go to the north of the state because it's mountainous and cooler when the summer comes. We were on a little retreat, and I was asleep middle of the night. And during the night, I had this dream that started as my own dreamscape. I'm a golfer. I was playing golf with a friend. We went into the bars. We finished our round. There was a silent auction going on, and all these items that were up for auction. One of them was a piece of framed art on the wall that was just hideous. I called my friend's attention to it and said, "Who in the world would give that to a charity? Isn't it awful?" But I wanted to see it better the way that we sometimes want to gawk at a collision on the highway or something. Sometimes awful things have a odd attractiveness about them. I moved toward it, but the surprising thing is it moved toward me, and then I was in this mystic space. Inside this screen on the wall, before we had televisions on walls, long before, a picture began to play of a young man, sitting on the radiator of the engine of a car from the late 1950s, early 60s. He burst into flame and he was screaming angrily, not just because he was on fire, but because he was angry at somebody outside the picture frame. And I woke up. Well, oftentimes priests have to take a turn having a pager from the hospital. In case a Catholic person is in a medical emergency in the night and requests a priest, you have to take a turn holding the pager. So I was used to having a pager go off and interrupt my sleep, and then suddenly have to shake myself alert, make sense of the person at the nurse's station, get the name of the patient, the number and such, and then get dressed and get over there. Well, this felt like that, except it wasn't a pager, it was in a dream, but I knew I was contacted. So I sat up and I said a prayer and I introduced myself and I said, "Whoever you are, I will do the best I can to help you. I'm going to go back to sleep right now, but in the morning, I'm going to seek out a friend and we'll be back in touch with you." So in the morning, I sought out a friend on that retreat who I knew had had a lot of the kind of spiritual gifts that many people listening to this either have or have been around. She was a woman with lots of uncommon psychic and spiritual gifts. And she was my prayer partner. We had prayed together for a number of years at that point for a lot of different concerns. So I went to her and said, "Would you mind on a break? Could we take a few minutes and go into prayer and see if we can discover what this is all about and how we might help?" Well, we did. And I've told this story so many times, it's widely available on my YouTube channel. I go on podcasts all the time, and they always want to know, how did this get started? So I'm going to kind of cut to the chase. The man's name was Ray. He died at 20 years old. He was burned in a fire. He had been taught that the reason that people die is that God takes them. So that was his construct. It was what was supplied. People die because God takes them. And we were praying, and my friend said, "Whoever this man is, he really wants to talk to you. Would it be okay if I allow him to?" She had the capacity to do that. And we had said our protective prayers, surrounding ourselves with Michael the Archangel, with I'm Christian and Catholic, so that's going to be a panoply of Christian saints and angels, but the surroundings of the holy ones, so that we were not inviting any kind of darkness. And I said, okay, we'll go ahead. He spoke through and he said, who the hell does he think he is? Killing me just when my life was getting good. So we were dealing with a guy who was angry in the afterlife and in some sort of stuck place because he isolated because he was angry at having died at all, and it was God's fault. Well, over a few sessions, we spoke to him, and he told us that the thing he wanted more than anything was to greet his wife when she passed. He had died in 1960, which by then was about 30 years earlier. I was only 4 years old at that time. I explained to him that we would help him. He said, my wife is old now. She's got cancer and she's going to die. I want to greet her when she passes, but I can't the way I am. And I said, well, okay, we'll try to figure this out. But we can't waste time. He told me that he hadn't been with anybody since he died in 1960. So that's a really long time to be alone. What if we try to get you in circulation a little bit? So we did that. We got his father to come and engage him a little bit. And in the end, he told us after 3 sessions over 3 weeks that he had big news for us. His wife had passed. He got to greet her when she passed in a group, not alone like he thought it might be. And finally, it was time to say goodbye. And I said, well, his name is Ray. I said, well, Ray, I think we helped you do what you came to do. I think it's time to say goodbye, isn't it? And he said, yeah, I think so, sir. And I said, well, Ray, before you go, now that you know how to greet people when they die, I wonder if you wouldn't mind keeping an eye on me, watching over me. And when it comes my turn, would you be there to greet me? And he said, why, sir, I'd be most honored. Just look for the perfect gentleman. I had been on his case because I told him he behaved like a caveman every time he talked about his wife. He acted like, I said, you act like you own the woman. She's 60 something years old now. You're not the only person she ever loved. Just chill out. Could you just imagine yourself as being one person who loves her very much, that wants to greet her, but don't make yourself a solo act. So anyway, that worked out. And the thing that happened that I had no idea was going to happen was that he was the first of probably about 450. They come each week now, about once a week, and I'm now prepared for them. I keep a journal on the nightstand. When I receive one of these dreams, I make the distinction between having a dream about my own psychobabble or receiving a dream, which is a message from somebody else. I've learned that the clientele, if you will, that I and my prayer partners deal with are people who died sudden, violent deaths. So that's an unusual population. Most of us won't die in a sudden, violent event, but many people do. And so I get these ones that were jolted from one kind of consciousness to another, and who, at first I call them stuck. In my second of the 2 books, we crossed out the word stuck. Sometimes they're stuck in a loop, a trauma loop, or a way of thinking that's unproductive. Other times they just needed extra help because of the way they died, particularly if it was because of murder or other awful things. Sometimes what I've seen is they go into an afterlife space, they become aware of it, and then they're in the presence of a kind of therapeutic team, very much the way our healthcare system is organized, where should you need help on the freeway, somebody comes to get you. Somebody takes you to the ER, the emergency room. Maybe you need to go into surgery. Other people are there that know how to do that. Then there might be people in an intensive care kind of place that know how to do that. Then you might go to a step down room, in a private room. Maybe you have the help of physical therapists who get you up and moving. There's an analog. There's something like that the people that I deal with have been through, and they make references to it. When I first got here, it was like this, but then it was like this, and then it was like this. And now they've told me that I don't need to be here any longer, and it's time for us to move you to a next place. And that's where I and my prayer partners come in. I think that we're sort of like the discharge staff in a medical system. Somebody like this, a social worker perhaps, meets with you on the day before you or the day of you're leaving the hospital to make sure you understand your medications, your next therapy appointment, follow up, whatever. We help them kind of collect themselves and then oftentimes to choose a partner with whom they move along. So in that slide that's on the screen right now, I tried to describe that process already. I call this the interrupted death experience. Yvonne, like you coined spiritually transformative experiences, did you not? That phrase?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Well, when I thought of writing this, I wanted it to sit next to Raymond Moody's near-death experience. And when I had read about the near-death experience and then became a member of IONS, I did learn that they're not all the same, but that many of them do have some common elements about leaving the body, being aware that you're out of body, but still having sensate input, sometimes a tunnel, sometimes attractive light, sometimes relatives or religious figures, all of that. Well, for my people, they don't report anything like that. They report being jolted, and sometimes they stay conscious during the entire experience. Other times they go unconscious and awaken in something like a hospital bed. Some of them have been people who lived in times and places where their access to a hospital with clean sheets and kind people would have been only for the wealthy. I've had some people say, I woke up in a rich man's hospital. Some people have been really surprised at how kind and caring the people in charge of them are. But in any event, we feel like we're somewhere in a continuum like that. So this interrupted death experience is the phrases I caused because I wanted it to be in the consciousness next to near-death experience. I hadn't yet heard about spiritually transformative experience, but anyway, when a dream comes, I write it in the journal, go back to sleep. I pray for that person until I can, and then I make an appointment with my prayer partners, just the way that we make appointments to be on something like this talk today. We arranged this a long while ago. We're all busy people doing more than one thing, and my prayer partners and I schedule the time. It used to be that we did it all face to face, and then the pandemic came. Fortunately, before the pandemic, I had already begun to use Zoom to do some of these because one of my most reliable partners had moved away, and she said, let's try it on Zoom. So it works just fine on Zoom. The prayer partner and I say a protective prayer. I do believe that the Creator made everyone well. I don't believe that there's that God has an evil twin, an evil God, or that some people are born evil. But there are just some people who have lost track of themselves somehow and are not behaving well and are not safe company. So I would never move into this realm without first making sure that I and my partners are safe. So we pray protective prayer. And then I have the capacity, I don't use the word channeling on purpose because I'm trying to stay a Roman Catholic priest and not be a former one. And in my polity, the word channeling just is radioactive. It's upsetting and so on. So I don't use that word to describe myself. I believe that the gift that of assisted speech is part of the letters of the spiritual gifts that are listed in the letters of St. Paul. They're also prevalent in the Jewish tradition. I was at a mass this morning, and most times at a Sunday mass, the first reading is one of the Hebrew prophets, and the prophet will maybe be speaking in his or her own voice, and then they'll move, their voice will be taken by the Spirit of God, and God will speak through them in first person narration. Anyway, we allow the person to tell their story. I always record them on an app on my phone. So I get them in their own words. When we're in the middle of this, we're co-conscious. I'm not entranced. I'm just allowing my voice to be borrowed by other people, the person that we're trying to help. And it doesn't usually take more than about half an hour to help them decide, yes, indeed, they're ready to move from one level to the next. It seems to be somewhat spatial, They talk about here and there. Sometimes the language is of levels. You don't need this level anymore. There's a next level. In fact, some people, when they think of the afterlife in positive terms, think of it as a big playground or a wonderland of some kind where all these possibilities live. And I think that's apt. But for the people that I deal with, they weren't ready for that. They were too beaten up by the experience of leaving this life. But now they're ready for that. And so now there's something, their guardian angels are very much a part of this. Their guardians help them out of the body, even if they died in horrific ways. The guardians stay with them all the while. And the guardians sometimes compare the day that we're working with them to something like a graduation day, a day that where we're gathered to honor the journey of the person that's come so far and for whom we're so excited because they're about to make a big transition that's going to be very exciting and fruitful for them. All right, I want to share a few specific stories. I've written 2 books. Each of them has 13 stories in them, and they're in people's own voice, in the language that they use to describe their own experience. I never use their stories in a public forum without first going back to them and asking them their permission. Their stories are highly personal, and whether or not they're private, I wouldn't know until I ask. May I have permission to tell your story publicly? And all the people in either of the 2 books have given that permission. In one case, we changed a name because she had some concern that her family didn't know that she had been murdered. They thought her death was accidental, and in fact, it was not. So she thought they can find that out later. I'd rather they just went about their lives without necessarily having to deal with that. So, but in most cases, they've given permission, and we use their first names. Do you remember that on December 26th of 2004, I'm looking at some of your faces now, and remember, I'm a preacher, so I'm used to being in front of a congregation. And if you give me some facial feedback, that's helpful to me. Do you remember in 2004, the day after Christmas, that catastrophic earthquake that hit in the Indian Ocean in Indonesia? It went all over the Indian Ocean. It not only killed people near the epicenter, but the tsunami waves went to Thailand and India. They went all the way to Africa from Indonesia, and 250,000 people were killed. Do you remember that? If you do, at that time, people all over the world, we were sending supplies and planes and stuff to try to help people that had survived that. Well, one of the people who came to me went through that event. Her name was Rani, R-A-N-I. She was 12 years old. She was on a holiday in Sri Lanka. Her family, she was the only child of 2 PhDs from India, but they were in a hotel on a seashore in Sri Lanka on a Sunday morning. She said, I was 12, but I felt like 20. She was frustrated that she was treated like a child, and she felt some of it was because her parents were so old-fashioned. And if only they understood these were modern times, they would have treated her and given her more freedom and so on. Well, she was forbidden to go to the beach without them, but it was a Sunday morning. The parents were sleeping in. She couldn't stand it 1 minute more. The beach was beckoning. So she broke the rules and went to the beach unescorted, just in time to be swept out to sea. She said, I couldn't have picked a worse time to disobey my parents. I went to the beach just in time to be swept out to sea. She didn't need to dwell on the terror of it because she had moved through that with other counselors. As I mentioned, my partners and I are at the end of a healthcare continuum. She'd gotten the care that she needed mostly, but she had died being a disobedient child. And so if you remember Hester Prynne and the Scarlet Letter, hers was an A for adultery. This one had a D for disobedient. She just carried into the afterlife that I'm colossally disobedient. I've ruined my parents' lives. I was their only child. Now they have no grandchildren. It's all because I'm so disobedient. So she had to work her way through that, and the fact that, well, that might be true, but does it really need to be your identity now and forever? Could we just say, yes, you were a bad girl for a moment. Can you just forgive yourself for having done a bad thing and go get on with it? And she pretty much did that. So when she got to us, we didn't need to do very much at all except acknowledge the progress that she'd made, and then it was time to move to a next level. And she said, they told me that you people get us to this point, and that we have the choice that we can invite someone to come for us, or we could simply wait to see who does. And she said, I think I would like the latter. I've been so kindly treated by so many people. I trust that will continue to be so. I would simply like to wait to see who arrives. We said, well, that's easy enough. So we go into prayer, and I only see what they show me. Sometimes they'll see things and say, hey, look at that. And I'll say, they're inside me, but that doesn't mean that we're screen sharing the exact same screen. They're seeing something and it's inside me, but I don't see it exactly. And if I don't, I just say, hey, can you describe to me what you're seeing? And she said, I'm seeing my family and my ancestors, except they look like bowling pins. And I said, well, okay, tell us about that. And she said, well, bowling, there's one pin that's at the front, and then there's two behind it, and then there are three, and there. And she said, and it seems to be stretching back into infinity, but they all are dressed in Indian clothing, and they're making me know that I belong to them already, and that if I allow them to, I will take my place among them. And so that was as easy as we just said, oh, so are you ready to do that? I think all you need to do is say the word. And she said the word, and she found herself in the nexus of her ancestors. When we went back to her to get her permission, we thought that process, it's a yes or no question. May we use your story? Yes or no. Could have been a really short conversation. But we found that most of the time, people kind of were excited about what's gone on since the last time they saw us and wanted to give us an update. And so we said, well, tell us all about it. And she said, well, I felt like I was 12 going on 20. I didn't like school. I felt it was holding me back. My parents were not giving me the freedoms I wanted, although I know that they were unreasonable. I wouldn't have allowed a 12-year-old on vacation to go up to the beach by herself either. But she said, I'm now at least 20, if not older. However her consciousness was, she didn't have to be a child anymore. And she said, I think have matured rather rapidly. And now I'm in my, whatever my body is matches the rest of me. And then she didn't go on to a great deal more detail than that, other than she had told us originally that we were asking her, may we use your story in a book? And she said, I would love to write a book. And my partner asked her, but she was coming through me. My partner said, well, what would it be about? She said, I don't even know yet. I just like the idea of writing a book, and the fact that the idea that anyone would purchase it and spend time with it. I just think that's so flattering. I said, well, we're writing a book. Why don't you help us on this one, since you're going to be featured in it? And so she said, I would love to do that. And so if you should find the book, especially the paper copy, Afterlife Interrupted, we made Ronnie the Afterlife assistant editor. So anytime I was working on book one, I always included her in my prayers at the very beginning and said, Ronnie, it's time to write another chapter. Whatever you can do from your side, help us out. So that's Ronnie. Book two looks almost like book one, except it has a 2 in the middle of it. Can you see that? Except we crossed out the word stuck, because, as I mentioned earlier, it seemed to us that some of them weren't as much stuck as they were just in need of extra care. I bet many of you are familiar with the phrase a trauma loop. If any of you worked with PTSD or perhaps suffered it, or maybe even had a time in your life where you just couldn't get a looping idea to shut up, something in your head just keeps turning over and over. It doesn't have to be hugely traumatic. Have you ever had the experience of being insulted? Somebody said something insulting about you, or in the workplace, somebody got angry with you, or you're clergy and you preached a homily and somebody takes you on the church steps because rah, rah, rah. And then you take that home and it just loops in your head. You might have had 10 people say, in my life, 10 people, oh, Father, that was a wonderful message. I'm so glad. And then somebody comes up and gripes at you. And then you go home and you let that gripe go churn and churn and churn. And then you go to bed with it. And then, then you're laying in your bed trying to go to sleep and you've got this nastiness going on around you. Well, that's a mild example. Some people have awful trauma loops, and some of them have them because they died traumatically. So sometimes you'll have people that died in a car crash, and the last thing they remember was the car sliding off the side and tumbling, and now they feel like they're inside a dryer, that they're just tumbling. And so sometimes in the afterlife, there needs to be somebody kind of coaching them out of that, helping them take a break from it, and return to it if you want to, but let's take a pause. Let's think about something else, or let's do this other thing. If you need to go back to that, go ahead. Well, I wanted to share with you, because we're international, that first story was international from Sri Lanka. And then there was this one. Oh my God, it's one of those mass shootings, except this one is from a part of the world where we get used to hearing about mass shooting. It was in Iraq. I had this dream that I was praying with a group of people in a dark room, and there was gunfire outside, and everybody got agitated, and I went to the door because I felt that I needed to protect somebody. I chose to open the door even though I knew it was dangerous. I walked into the street and saw bleeding people and didn't know where the shooting was coming from. And then I turned to my right, and a 10-year-old was holding a machine gun, and there were people pointing guns at her head, and she shot me. And I woke up. Well, can you see how I would call that receiving a dream and not just having a dream? That's not the world I live in. I guess, unfortunately, it is. But on a daily basis, that's not what I'm dealing with. But this was what happened to this man. We went into prayer. We made our appointment. We protected ourselves in prayer. And this delightful man moved in. His name is Nadi, N-A-D-I. Nadi explained that, well, first of all, he said, I can hardly believe that I'm talking to an American, a Christian, and a priest. And he said, and by the way, I never learned to speak English, but all I'm doing is forming my thoughts, and they're coming out of this man's mouth in English. And it's as easy as that. But he went on to explain that his mosque had been bombed, he said, because we were the wrong kind of Muslim. So it was one co-religionist, that kind of violence that goes on when you're the wrong kind of Muslim. He said our mosque had already been bombed and blown up. We couldn't use it. The society around us was in such disarray that there was no proper imam. And so some of us had to step up and be the leaders. So he was a businessman, and in his mosque, he helped find a warehouse that had few windows and only one door, and they felt it was like a bunker, but it would be safe to pray there. However, in his congregation, men and women didn't pray in the same room. So there needed to be a nearby prayer room for the wives and daughters. So the men are in one, the women are in the other. The men hear this machine gun stuff going on, and he decided, I can't let my wife and daughters and all the other women be endangered and stay behind a locked door. I must try to do what I can. So he chose to open the door to an active shooter circumstance. And the little girl was told if she didn't shoot him, they would shoot her, her mother, and her sister. And so the little girl did shoot him, and he did die. Well, doesn't that sound horrible? Who would want to die a death like that? But he described what happened next, and it's in book 2, and I'm only trying to give you a thumbnail of it right now, but it's just lovely. He's still one of the favorite people I've met in this way. He said, I knew that my religion was trying to teach us things that helped us be united and to live good lives. And he said, but I knew sometimes it was not getting everything right, and you had to kind of make your way. Sometimes we were taught it was okay to have a certain kind of enemy, for example, and he thought that never really sat well with me. But he said, after I got here, I wasn't unconscious very long at all because I thought it was just too important for me to pay attention. And in all the ones that I've dealt with, that's one of the ways that they can differ at the time that they pass, is whether they go unconscious or whether they want to stay conscious. And there's sometimes they can fight hard to stay conscious and not go unconscious. Sometimes they just want that. He wanted that. He wanted to know and understand, and he wanted to keep making things better for other people. He knew that many had died as he did, and he wanted to keep improving things. One of the things that he talked about was the angels. The guardian angels are very active in helping people pass. So you might wonder, what was your guardian angel doing when you got killed in the car crash? If you're such a good guardian, how come you let me die in a car crash? Well, they all pretty much say, I did the best I could. And we know that you're mortal when we're assigned to you. You're going to die one day. And that's one of the most important days that we can serve you, is when you're leaving the body, however you leave it. And I didn't leave you. I was with you. I was there to catch you, and I helped you along, and so on. One of the things he said was, in Islam, we don't depict saints, God, angels with bodies. Our churches are only adorned with mosaics and geometric patterns of beauty and color. And he said, they let me know afterwards that embedded in all of those mosaics were the angels. And he said, did you ever play with a kaleidoscope? Toto, come over here. Get over here. Come here. Come on. I want you to meet my new friend. Come over here. You're going to bark. I'm going to have to make you leave the room. This is my buddy, Toto. He's important to the story because very often when we're doing a crossing, he's sitting in my lap. And when a person moves into me, we're co-conscious. So it really becomes our lap. And so these people oftentimes they've been through trauma. And this one is just so sweet and gentle that very often just his energy aids in the whole process. He just sits there unless there's another dog out the window, which I think is what's going on. But most of the time, he's just real sweet. The other day, I was with a lady that had died. I think she died in a car crash. And when she was ready to go, my partner and I were congratulating her on her journey. And he just kissed us right on the nose. And she said, why, he just kissed me goodbye. So anyway, I'll send him out of the room in case he makes noise again, but I wanted you to meet him. So hang on. There you go. So anyway, Nadi was telling us that kaleidoscopes, a children's toy, was these mosaic patterns in motion. And he said, the angels showed me how they were in the walls of our mosque. They were just disguised as mosaics, but they were there all along. They were bright pieces of light with light reflecting off of them and so on. He ended up passing in a group, and I've seen this, it's not all that often, maybe 1 in 10 of the ones that we do, but sometimes there'll be a group of people in a field in this first afterlife plane who all died of the same thing. They all drowned, or they all fell from something. Or in his case, they had all died in wartime violence in Iraq. He explained to me that all of us who live here live between the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. He said this part of the world would be practically uninhabitable were it not for these two rivers. So our lives are very tied to the rivers, and our festivals almost always involve the rivers. He said we have festivals throughout the year that follow the seasons, and very often there'll be decorated floating platforms with whatever the theme of the parade is, but families will create their own boat, and people have a lot of happy memories of times being spent in festivals on the rivers. When it came time for him to cross, he said, I'm a leader, and today I don't know who I'm leading, but whatever it is I'm doing, it's inviting other people to do it as well. He said, I don't know whether everyone here will choose to go or not, but I'm going, and others may as well. Well, then as it unfolded, he said, we're now in the rivers, the water's rising above us, but only for like a foot or two, so that we're waiting. We're in the cool of the river, and it's enough to float a boat. And each of us is seeing whatever would make it easiest for us to come aboard. And he said, I'm seeing my Father right now, and he's beckoning to me to come. I'm not getting on just yet because I feel like I'm supposed to be helping others. And no one was being shamed that they weren't, if they chose not to get on, that was okay, that wasn't bad. They perhaps just weren't ready. But he's just said, everybody is seeing whatever it is that they most need to see. So that's the way that worked, and off he went. We had a nice conversation with him later to be able to get permission to use the story. And then finally, I'm going to do one more story before we take questions. I wanted a man, a woman, and a child. You've gotten a child from Sri Lanka, and you got a man from Iraq. I wanted to get a woman, and I have a story that I just love to tell because it just she's so dear to me. In this one dream, I felt like I was a woman who was elderly and frail on a couch, and there was a knock at the door, and it was menacing, and I awoke. That's all it was. But when we went into it, it turned out to be this woman named Claire. I think she lived in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, but I'm not certain. I do know that it was a rural area, and she was at the end of a road. She was elderly and frail. She had fallen and broken some ribs, and was spending most of her time on a sofa in her living room watching television. Neighbors brought her food. She had given a key to the house to someone else. And this particular day, she heard a rattling of the door and thought, I don't remember any, they always call to tell me they're coming. This time it wasn't that. She got up, she looked, and it was a man and a woman who appeared to be on drugs and appeared to her to be a threat, to be dangerous. So she said, I tried to rouse myself. She said, I weighed less than 100 pounds, but I tried to rouse myself and defend my home and insist that they leave. But instead, the man pushed me over, and she said, that's all it took to end it for me. So the man shoved her, and she died on the floor. She said, that's when things really began to change. She said, I was a Christian woman, but I'd quit going to church because it was just so difficult for me. I could hardly move. And so I said my prayers at home. She said, I was a Christian woman, but I didn't pay any attention to having a guardian angel until he showed himself to me. And he swooped me up and put me between the roof and the canopy of trees above my house. And there we were. And he said, this is really an understatement, it's unpleasant here. Let's leave. The lady just got murdered in her own house, and her guardian just says, it's unpleasant here. Let's leave. So she said, I couldn't imagine that being killed in your own home could be so easy. I had just been killed. Now I'm above my house. And he says to me, it's unpleasant here. Let's leave. And then he said, it would be easiest if you would just get on my back and we'll fly away. And she said it reminded her of a television show she'd seen of tandem skydiving, of someone being on the back or being strapped to somebody that knew about skydiving and another person who'd never done it before. But she said, I would never in my life have jumped out of a plane and attached to anyone or not. But he was so kind. He just said, and it reminded her of the Superman movie that she had seen, of getting on Superman's back. And so she said, well, okay. So she got on his back and they flew to safety somehow. Then in her afterlife, first landing place. She got the care that she needed, and she progressed and so on. She had to get used to not being frail because she'd been frail for so long. She had to get used to being energetic, to be able to make real choices among real options because her life had had so few. And then what she came to us, one woman who reminds me of her, we ask sometimes, how did you find us? And another lady told us that she used to catalog shop before the internet from J.C. Penney's and Sears catalogs. Do any of you remember when those great big thick books would arrive in the mail? They had tiny little print. You had to put all these little code numbers on an envelope and mail it back in. She said they showed me a catalog of different ways this could happen. And one of them was this Catholic priest and his friends. And I said, well, I think I'd do that one because I was a Catholic. I think I'll choose that one. Well, anyway, she moved through what she needed to, and then she showed up with us. And then when we spoke to her, and she was so sweet. When we got to the point where it's time for her to leave, my partner said, well, you know, we often ask people, do you know who you'd like to have come for you? And she said, yes, they told me in advance to be prepared for that question. And I know exactly who I want to come for me. It's my sister, Celie. She died 40 years ago as a young woman. I've been talking to her picture ever since. And she said, if I could talk with the real thing, that would be really nice. And so we said, well, just be still for a minute. We'll say a prayer and we'll ask for Celie, short for Cecilia. And then that was one of those ones where she said, oh, look at there. And I said, well, you're going to have to tell me what you're looking at. And she said, why, look at that. She looks just like a little tart. You ever use that phrase? I wouldn't ever call a woman a tart, but she called her sister a tart. And she looks just like a little tart. And she said, now you have to understand that when we were young, Celie always wanted to be a stewardess in the days where they made them be real thin, and they gave them these sexy little outfits with a tight belt. And she was struggling for the word epaulette, those things that are on the shoulder of a military uniform or maybe a band uniform. So once she got the word epaulette straight, she said she's got epaulettes and she's got a plane and it has staircase up to it. And she's standing at the top with a tray and an umbrella drink in it for me. She just wants me to step aboard her plane. She's going to serve me an umbrella drink and we're going to fly out of here. And so I said, well, that's really sweet. So in the second book, she's called Claire and Celie the Stewardess. So some of these leave takings are they're just breathtaking in their variety, their humor, the way that the angels interact. They're just delightful. But I've gone on for about 50 minutes now, and I think it's time for me to take a deep breath. And Yvonne, if you would, you moderate the comments, the Q&A. So would you?
That is correct.
Take it from here.
Thank you, Father Nathan Castle. That was really, really, really fascinating. And I love the humor that you weaved in with it. It's nice to know that our guardian angels have a sense of humor and God has a sense of humor.
They can just be so funny if they want to be. They're not all that way. You can be a guardian angel and be quite sober if you want to be, but some of them choose to be real funny about it.
Wonderful. Well, I'll start off. We have a lot of questions. Ingrid has a question for you. She says, why was the first guy alone, the one you spoke with at the very beginning? Why was he not greeted in the afterlife, or did he choose to be alone?
He chose to be alone. That's exactly right, Ingrid. And he wasn't absolutely alone. His guardian was with him, but he created the nearest thing to nothing that he could. And whatever his space was that was next to nothing, his guardian was on the edge of it, where Ray would tolerate him. Mm-hmm. But that was, Ray created that.
Mm-hmm. For himself. Mm-hmm. Nancy would like to ask you, how do you communicate with souls who don't speak English?
What I've been told is all they need to do. Nadi did that. He just formed his thoughts and they came out of my mouth in English. That's all.
Mm-hmm. It seems that telepathy does not have a language, has been my observation, same as yours.
Yeah, and I've heard some of the angels say, we love you humans, and we understand that your way of communicating is like, one of them talked about like pearls on a string, and that there's word and word and word and word and word, and you have to put them all in the right order, and they have to be the right kind. He said it's quite laborious. When you get here, you're going to really enjoy not having to do that.
Anne has another comment and question. She says, I've recently wondered about this. A friend's sister died about 2 months ago. My friend had a meeting with a known medium, and he saw that the deceased woman was alone. My friend had a dream and also saw her being alone. She was in shock. Okay, so in the dream, she was in shock that she had left her body. She seemed to be stuck, like Father Nathan is talking about. So, shock of being out of body, would that be a reason why people are alone?
It can be, yeah. Even people that die in an event with other people, haven't you wondered, 200 people died in the plane crash. Did they all go together? Was there one like supervisor that took over? It seems to be not. It seems like people respond very differently to their circumstances, which shouldn't really surprise us that much, I guess. But yeah, everybody, it's really important, whatever the content of your consciousness is, that's going to guide a lot of whatever happens next.
Mm-hmm. We're really getting a lot of questions on the same theme. I really want to hear from Father Nathan about people who die and feel alone. Why are they alone and not greeted by loved ones and angels, etc.? So it's the same thing again.
Well, I would ask any of those questioners, whenever you have felt alone or been around people that felt alone, what was behind it? Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it's shame. Sometimes it's, social awkwardness, being made to feel stupid. There are all kinds of reasons that a person might just want to walk away from others. And some of that, and then some people characteristically do that over a long period of time. Sometimes they just might have a disposition towards very strong introversion and just prefer their own company. It doesn't have to be a pathology to want to be alone more than with others. There can be lots of different reasons, but remember, this little population I work with died violently, and sometimes it's exhaustion or overwhelm. It's something like the way that our houses are designed to shut themselves off in a hurricane or a lightning storm, the breaker box that shuts off the electricity. Sometimes they just shut down for a time because it's all too much. And then they kind of gradually come back online after that.
Fascinating. Sylvia has a different question. Have you ever verified that those individuals that you helped cross over actually existed and learned more about their earthly existences?
Yeah, Sylvia, that question is coming up so often that it wouldn't surprise me if the next year or two of my life moves in that direction. But I've been doing this for about 25 years, and there are 2 or 3 out of 450 that kind of verified themselves because of the circumstances, and sometimes there's been ones that have been in the news and so on. But no, I've not gone. I started early on trying to do that. Do you ever watch any of those crime shows that always have some really geeky person that has this massive walls of computers, and all they need to do is tap in a few things, and in an instant they have the crook's home phone number? It just doesn't work that way. It's much harder. And you saw the difficulty you had with screen sharing. Can you imagine me trying to do all that? I'm busy enough. They keep coming once a week anyway. So I just kind of stayed at my post. But it isn't impossible that I'm thinking, if the Holy Spirit guides it, I'm the Lord's servant. I'm not doing this on my own. I'm doing this under the guidance of the Spirit. If the Spirit wants me to start that verification path, I'll begin going down it one step at a time, but it hasn't been my focus.
Understood. Christina has yet a different question. She says, Have you ever had any people who died in the World Trade Center event of 9/11? I
Yes,
heard about mediums who have had several come through who were in a state of shock or surprise.
I have. Now that we're, more than 20 years away from that, maybe in the future I'll bring one of those into the public, but I'm very I'm very concerned about not hurting people. And there can be a lot of pain about losing a loved one in a violent way, even if it seems to the rest of the world like that's so long ago. Yvonne, you should have been over it by now. It's not the way it works. And so I want to be very careful about, and I asked the people, may we use your story? And sometimes they've held back. But yes, I have dealt with a few in the World Trade Center. And um, one of the aspects is it can be more complicated to have your violent traumatic death be a news event and have your loved ones being interviewed, and it was awful enough to go through, and then there can be kind of an awfulness about the fact that you're a curiosity. So I've dealt with maybe 3 or 4 of those people, but again, they all have a happy ending. They all survived their their death, and they've all had the help they needed to move through things and to get on with it. um, that's the part that that keeps me coming back.
I like this. A happy ending. They all survived their death.
They all survived their death.
Excellent. Sylvia has a message. Have you ever helped the police and solve a murder by identifying the murderer?
I have not. Um, once in once I did try. It really it wasn't a person that came in a dream, but there was one time when I felt like that I might have that kind of information, and I did relay it to police, and I don't think it was ever acted upon. But I haven't. I don't believe that that's my mission. I don't believe that I'm to be a forensic sleuth. So even in the thing that I was talking about, it feels like I'm part of this discharge team. I'm not at the front end doing the counseling. I know how to do that kind of counseling. I've been a pastor for most of my life, and I've dealt with a lot of people's odd circumstances. But no, I'm just this guy at the other end, just doing this rather simple task of helping them get their act together and move along.
Mhm, mhm. We have another interesting question from Ken. He says, Father Castle, have you ever dealt with people who committed suicide?
I have, and in the dreams, they very rarely make it obvious that they suicided. You don't see a gun to the head or anything like that. In the storytelling, there begins to be a feeling, oh, this one might have taken their life. And I chose to put at the end of book 2, I got 2 suicide stories in the same night in the same dream. So if you can imagine, they sort of line up in order, and there were these 2 that were here, and the dreams didn't really have much to do with each other, but they told them together, and I woke up from both of them, and I wrote them down as one. And then when we went into helping them, we did them one after another and discovered that each of them had lived in the late 1920s, early 30s, or maybe into the 40s, and both of them had taken their life, one a man and one a woman. They're very dear people. One, B was a big band singer. Do any of you remember that era of, I mean, I don't remember it. I was born in 1956, but I've seen the movies of when there was one woman at the front singing into the microphone, and then there'd be like clarinet players in the background and a whole band. This young woman was recruited off the farm at 18, brought into a band like that was otherwise all male. They did mostly local shows. They used to house her with sort of dorm mothers, kind of matronly women. Then they began going further from where she had grown up, and they were putting her in a hotel, but they kept a key to the room. And the men started letting themselves into her room and having their way with her. She'd never even had sex until the boys in the band started raping her. And then she got pregnant, and she didn't know by who. This is in book 2. But she describes the whole thing, and she told me she didn't want any part of me telling her story if I was going to religion shame her. I said, why would I do that? Well, because you're a priest, aren't they going to make you? And I said, nobody makes me do anything. And besides, all I want to do is help. And she just said, I asked her, did you ever, when you speak of that event, do you use the word suicide? And she said, nobody's ever asked me that. And I said, well, what do you think? And she said, what I did was take my life into my own hands. That's what she said. Well, I didn't want to write anything that encouraged anybody that might be suicidal to take their life. So it took some extra care in the telling of these stories. Anyway, she's one. And then another one was a man who was in financial services at the time of the great crash in 1929. And he said, I wasn't one who leapt out the window that day, but my life got harder and harder and harder until the window looked more and more attractive. And then he said eventually he did that. But they're both far enough in time that they agreed to let their stories be told, because just about everybody that remembers them would have also died and passed on by now. So they did permit their stories to be shared, and they're in book 2.
That is a very hopeful perspective. Ingrid has an interesting question. She says, have you always been supported by your church and community doing this amazing work?
No. Show of hands. How many are surprised at that? No, but supported enough. These books have been out in the public for about 3 or 4 years now. And I have a vow of obedience. I have a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And my vow of obedience is to the provincial of my Western Dominican province. And one went out of power, and the other one was elected. And both, in each case, they wrote forwards for my books, just saying that they believe that I'm a man of prayer and that my experiences are the truth. So, but that doesn't mean that that's universal. Sometimes, I'm not just this. I don't know how normal any of you think you are. This is a relatively abnormal group to belong to. But I do other things. I say masses. I teach scripture. I do things that lots of priests do. And sometimes a church will hire me to come and do something, and then they'll find out about this, and then I'm uninvited. But I don't want to go where I'm not wanted anyway, so that's okay. So I would like to stay a Catholic priest in good standing if it's possible, and I'm not going out of my way to tweak anybody. And one of the things earlier, several of the presentations this weekend have had to do with unitive consciousness or dualistic consciousness. And for me, the word Catholic, it means universal. The irony is that when you use a capital C for Catholic, it's the small group. It's the 1.4 billion out of 8 on the planet. When you use the small c, it means everybody. So I can be a Catholic priest, capital C, or a Catholic priest, little c. I'm just at the service of the universe, as I've always been, and I'm just telling the truth. So if I get any grief over it, I can at least sleep well at night, because I just did my job. And if it brings me grief, well, I follow the crucified and risen one. I knew long ago that it wasn't going to tickle following Jesus. That's just not the way it works.
Very true. Very true. Daela has another question. When people have not yet crossed over for many years or even decades, do you think they experience time similarly to the way we experience time here?
Thanks for that question. That's a real important one. Do any of you know somebody that doesn't know what time it is? or what day it is, or where they left their glasses, or whatever. There are some people that just don't pay much attention to what time it is here, and some, when they cross over, bring that with them. They just really don't care much about it at all. Others, particularly people that leave behind young children when they die, I've seen this. It can be really tough on people that I haven't had children of my own, but I understand it's pretty life-changing. And that whatever you thought your purpose for living was, when children enter into it, it shifts things. And people can begin to think that their mission now is to get these young ones raised up to adulthood. And then they're suddenly taken in a car crash or something, and they can feel very cheated. And they feel like time was taken away from them, and they want to be back in time, and they want to help raise their kids and so on. So they can get some coaching about how to come back and to be present to their families in ways that are proper and not creepy. The fact that a person has been gone a long time, there was a woman named Wilhelmina, who's in book 2, who chose to move very slowly in her afterlife healing. And she knew that she was doing it, and her helper said, "We know that you want to go slow, and this is your progress we're talking about. You're in charge of it. You set the pace, and we'll follow it. But we're not going to push you faster than you want to go." So it really is. I was taught when I was a child that people had to stay in purgatory longer because they had more sins. It was all about sin and grace. What I'm seeing is the little corner of the world, afterlife world that I've been involved in, is it's really about healing. And that some people want the physical therapist to make them do 10 more reps, and others say, stop, I've had enough. So time, yes, some of them pay quite a lot of attention to it. I learned early on that if you ask a person, what year did you die in? You know, like when you go to the doctor, how many of you go to the doctor and they ask you your date of birth over and over and over again? You have to keep repeating that number. I thought the year that you died would be a number that you just rattle off, but no. For the Americans, I've often had to say, can you remember who was the last president you can think of? Because I know my presidents. I've been an American my whole life, so that puts me, if they tell me, you know, it was Carter, okay, well, I remember that. So yeah, they're all over the board about time. But I haven't seen anybody that feels like they were punished because they haven't. One of the most delightful things I keep hearing over and over again is, I love it here because nobody's judging anybody else. Nobody's making anybody feel stupid or slow or anything. Everybody, even the suicides. I remember B was talking about her suicide, and she felt that she was supposed to have some shame around it. And she sort of expressed that to one of her caregivers. And they said, well, we weren't where you were. We're only where you are. And where we are, we will help you.
How beautiful. How beautiful.
It was very simple.
Yeah, very beautiful. So I think we have time for one last question. And this is interesting. Do you or have you run into people who have reincarnated?
I haven't. And I'm often asked, because I hang around groups like this one, if I believe in reincarnation. And I just often say, well, is there something about reincarnation that involves a veil of unknowing, passing into a new incarnation and somehow forgetting everything before was part of the deal? If I did that, I've forgotten very well. As far as I know, this is life number one. But no, I haven't dealt with that. And that's not to say if that's a path, maybe the possibilities that my partners and I help launch people into, maybe that's what they do next. I don't know. But the simple, direct answer is no, I haven't.
Thank you, Father Nathan, for an absolutely inspiring, hope-lifting talk about what happens to us and how we survive death and how we are helped to the next stage of death.
Okay, and watch this, everyone. I just screen shared. Can you see it?
Yes, we do.
Those are the two books. They're available in 3 formats on Amazon. They're paper books, they're ebooks, and they're their audiobooks, which I and my prayer partners did. And I used as often as I could, I used the actual voices of the people who actually were in those conversations. And the books are largely the dialogue of the back and forth that happens in a session.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Father Nathan.
Oh, and let me, Yvonne, just before you end, my website is right there, nathan-castle.com. If you want to contact me, go to the website, and on the upper left, there's the little envelope icon that gives you an email. I'm very responsive to the email. I really don't like Facebook Messenger or comments next to a YouTube or something like that. But if you want me to reply to you, go to the website and send me an email, and I'll be back in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Father Nathan.